This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. So Rudy Giuliani is making the rounds. Sat down with Dana Bash on CNN to talk about the investigation. Extended interview, of course, the Mueller investigation. And Giuliani essentially made his case that the basis for the Mueller investigation is illegitimate, that the Mueller investigation, sans the false basis, was legitimate until it became now also illegitimate. So both the basis and the substance of the Mueller investigation are now illegitimate, according to member of Trump's legal team, Rudy Giuliani.
I just want to go through, because I know you use this term a lot, and obviously so does the president. This investigation has already brought charges against 22 people and entities, including 13 Russians who have been indicted for trying to change the outcome of the election. So how is it a rigged investigation when they're not even close to being done and they already have this in their pocket?
Well, because first of all, there are two different investigations, right? The counterintelligence investigation is now over for over a year, and they weren't disclosing it to anybody. Immediately, that raises questions in my mind. Why not? I think why not? Because it clears the president. Then you get the Comey thing, which is a leak of a confidential memo, which is illegal for an FBI official to do, and that becomes the basis for appointing Mueller. I'm not saying Mueller is illegitimate. I'm saying the basis on which he was appointed is illegitimate. Now let's look at the indictments.
I just want to stop. So you think that the Mueller probe is legitimate?
Not anymore.
Not anymore. And the interesting, Dana Bash has set up there about 22 indictments. Yeah, okay. You have, in terms of principles here, 13 Russians that are never going to appear in an American courtroom is not groundbreaking here. In terms of Russian collusion, which is the genesis of the investigation, the basis of it, you have Papadopoulos and Flynn for lying to the FBI, and you have Manafort and Gates for things that are unrelated to the Russian collusion investigation. And Dana Bash and the D.C. press corps trying to pass this off as somehow productive. I'm not buying it. In addition to that, you had Mark Meadows, chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, Republican from North Carolina. He was on with Face the Nation, and he had some specific questions he believes should be answered about that confidential informant the FBI had embedded in the Trump campaign, Stefan Halper.
You have to ask the question, when did it start? We do know that actually those confidential human sources were engaging prior to the official FBI investigation. So the question begs, at whose direction? What were they collecting and who were they reporting to? Because that was happening before the FBI actually opened an investigation.
Yeah. When did it happen? What were they collecting? Who was he reporting to? This all seem like legitimate questions. For some answers to legitimate questions and assertions by Rudy Giuliani and the Trump White House, we're pleased to be joined again by our friend Andy McCarthy, a former federal prosecutor in Manhattan, of course, a columnist, contributing editor for National Review, nationalreview.com. He, along with Byron York and Kim Strassel at Wall Street Journal, are like the three must-reads on this whole topic of Russian collusion, these concurrent investigations. Andy, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Morning. Great to be with you.
So what about Rudy's assertion that the basis for the investigation was illegitimate and Mueller no longer has legitimacy in terms of the substance of what the investigation is, of how the investigation is proceeding?
Well, I think two things struck me, Dan, listening to what you and Amy played a second ago. One is that Rudy's obviously the president's lawyer, and he's clearly going to make the best pitch from his point of view. He's an advocate. He's not, somebody who doesn't have a dog in this fight, so to speak. And the second thing is there's a real imprecision in the language as the media interviews the Trump people. And I find this again and again. So, for example, Rudy says that the origins of the investigation are illegitimate. And Dana Bash comes back and says, well, how could you say this was rigged? They've got, 22 dispositions or 22 convictions or 22 charges, whatever she says. And I'm sitting there baffled because I don't know how she went from the legitimacy of the opening of the investigation to whether it's rigged, which is a completely different question.
Yeah, and she's also sort of arguing, she's also kind of essentially asserting ends justify the means. It's producing some results, so who cares if it was illegitimate?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I mean, you can attack, let's say, for example, I have a grand jury that's not properly convened under the law, and they crank out, 10 sets of charges against people who are actually guilty of what they've been charged with. It could be perfectly true that the charges that were brought against the people were on the up and up in the sense that they really did commit the crimes, and the investigation could be illegitimate because the grand jury wasn't properly convened, right? So in the instance we're dealing with Mueller, the problem with his investigation from the start has been that he's appointed as a special counsel under regulations that the Justice Department is supposed to follow, and the regulations say that you can only appoint a special counsel for a criminal investigation under circumstances where you spell out the factual grounds for having a criminal investigation, and the Justice Department didn't do that. Now, that doesn't mean that if Mueller conducts an investigation like he has in the nature of something that doesn't have any limits or boundaries, if he finds misconduct, that's not really misconduct, but it does call into question the legitimacy of his investigation in the sense that he was not appointed properly under the law. He's a very good prosecutor. He's a very good investigator. It doesn't mean that the stuff that he's found hasn't been crimes, but it does call into question his capacity, his jurisdiction to bring these charges. And I guess the second thing is, if you look at what he was appointed to conduct, it was a counterintelligence investigation, as Rudy points out, which is very different from a criminal investigation. His main mandate has been to find out, to get to the bottom of Russia's threat to our election system. And in that connection, whether he had the jurisdiction or not, he brought these charges against 16 Russians, right? 13 individuals and 3 entities. Well, okay, that certainly seems within the bounds of what he was asked to investigate. He didn't, we can quibble about whether it's criminal or counterintelligence. If you're doing a legitimate counterintelligence investigation and you find evidence of crimes, you're allowed to charge those. But all the other stuff that she's padding the stats with, as you pointed out, has nothing or very little to do with what the rationale for this investigation was in the first place. So, the fact that Manafort may have committed a bunch of money laundering, and we don't know yet, he hasn't been convicted, he's only accused, but let's say he committed everything that Mueller says he committed. He's got like 30 or 40 felony charges involving escapades with the Ukrainians between 2004 and basically 2014. That doesn't have anything to do with what Mueller was brought in to investigate. So the fact that he might be able to convict Manafort on that doesn't at all support the legitimacy of either the origins of the investigation or the way it's been conducted.
Or the necessity of a special prosecutor for those sorts of prosecutions. What about what Mark Meadows said, too, these questions he has about the confidential informant, Stefan Halper, maybe there are others, Michael Caputo suggesting that others from other agencies made a run at him. But it's been fascinating to watch. The D.C. press corps has essentially taken the position that Trump's assertion that this could possibly be bad, that it could be bigger than Watergate, that you have essentially the machinery of the state being used by those in power to spy on a political campaign. This could have been happening, which should be chilling. They basically take a position.
They're poo-pooing it.
Well, you have no proof that that's what happened, so we don't want to know the answer to that question.
Well, they're calling the spy a source.
So So why don't we get okay, fine. Then prove up by giving us the answer to the question.
Yeah, it used to be that journalists were like in the investigation business, right?
Right, yeah.
Well, now they're in denial.
What it meant was that, I'm sorry?
I said now they're in denial because it doesn't fit their narrative. So they're not saying that it's a spy. They're saying, no, this person is a source. But was he, yes or no, paid by the FBI $400,000?
Yeah.
Or is that fake news?
Yeah. I mean, I've said this before. I mean, I'm astonished by the punctiliousness of the bit about the nomenclature. You know, when I was a prosecutor, when the informants worked for the government, for the prosecution, when I got up to talk to the jury, they were confidential informants. And when the defense lawyers got up to talk to the jury in the same case about the same people, they were spies.
Yeah, right, of course.
But, you know, everybody knew that it was the same thing, right? They're covert operatives who were going to get information. And the issue isn't the nomenclature. You know, the issue isn't what euphemism or hyperbole you use to describe them. The issue is, was there a legitimate reason to use informants under circumstances where we have a norm in this country that says the incumbent administration does not use the awesome counterintelligence powers in federal law against the opposition political party in a political campaign in the absence of very strong evidence of egregious misconduct. And it doesn't look like they have that. And the oddball thing listening to all this is, you know, I said a moment ago, we have to remember Rudy's an advocate. He's the president's lawyer. At least Rudy isn't pretending to be anything other than the president's lawyer. When I listen to the media people question him, they're advocates too. And that's fine, but they ought to just say so instead of pretending to be objective, because they're clearly not.
No question. And so when Rudy and Dana Bash also kicked around this idea again of Trump sitting down with Mueller, and Rudy reiterated that Trump really wants to sit down with Mueller. He's basically hell-bent on it, and his position and the legal team's position is much less enthusiastic, seem to be increasingly less enthusiastic as compared to what Rudy was saying just a couple of weeks ago. And maybe it's in part because it seems like the public is turning against this investigation as legitimate. So if you don't have public support, and thus you wouldn't have popular support backing congressmen to move on impeachment, then why take the risk? What's your opinion where the investigation stands right now about that potential sit-down?
Well, my opinion about that hasn't changed, which is that the big hole in this equation is a showing by Mueller that his interview of the president is necessary for some imperative purpose. So if you in the Justice Department wanted to interview, say, a journalist or a defense lawyer, you wouldn't just be able to do that because you thought it would be interesting and relevant. You would have to show that you had such an important reason, you were investigating something really serious in the nature of crime, and the source that you were seeking, who has special constitutional duties or protections, is an absolutely essential witness in the sense that you can't get the information from any place else. So what I would want, what I don't understand hasn't happened to this point is no one in the Justice Department has no supervisor. Everybody in the Justice Department has a boss, including the Attorney General, who answers to the president. The special counsel has a boss, even though he's being allowed to operate as if he didn't have one. And the adult leadership here, which is supposed to be the Deputy Attorney General in this instance, should not allow Mueller to even ask to interview the president in the absence of showing, here is the very serious crime that I need to take up the time of the President of the United States for, and here is why I must interview him, because no one else has the evidence and the testimony that I need in order to make this case. If he can't satisfy that, then we shouldn't even be having a discussion about whether a federal prosecutor gets to talk to the president. I hate to break this to people, but the president's job is more important than Mueller's, and it's more important than Mueller's investigation. And in a normal case, you don't get to talk to any public official that you think might be interesting to speak to. You have to show that it's essential to do it.
He is Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, contributing editor at National Review, nationalreview.com. Andy, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate your insights.
My pleasure.
And
Take
he
care.
joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.